your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Hello, I'm Naveen Day. Thanks for joining us for a look at what made headlines this past week. A junior girls football coach in Lethbridge has been charged with multiple child sexual exploitation offenses, which includes the allegation that he used artificial intelligence to make child pornography. Justin Tillery was arrested by Alert's Internet Child Exploitation Unit on July 16th with help from the Lethbridge Police Service. The 38-year-old has been charged with making, distributing, possessing, and accessing child pornography, along with transmitting an intimate image without consent. Tillery allegedly used AI to manipulate and sexualize photos of underage girls. Tillery is coached with both the Lethbridge Rams and Football Alberta U18 team women's teams. Tillery has been released from custody on a number of court-imposed conditions, including those that would prevent him from coaching anyone under 18. He is scheduled to appear in Lethbridge Court on August the 8th. A man and woman have been charged by Lethbridge Police for drug trafficking offenses after police seized over 3,700 doses of street drugs, including a variety of light green fentanyl molded into gummy bear shapes. On July 9th, LPS arrested 61-year-old Gregory Johnston and 51-year-old Deborah Bolender in the 900 block of Mayor McGrath Drive South. Both were wanted on outstanding warrants. Johnston was found with controlled substances and cocaine, over $7,000 in cash, and a stolen e-bike. A subsequent search warrant was executed at their residence, leading to the discovery of 51 light green fentanyl gummy bears, more than 3,700 street doses of cocaine, ketamine, fentanyl, and meth were seized, as well as an additional $7,400 in cash proceeds of crime, totaling a combined value of over $84,000. Both Johnston and Bolender faced various charges and were remanded in custody and appeared in court on July the 17th. Police are also currently investigating a pedestrian hit and run and are currently attempting to identify both the driver and the pedestrian. LPS received a report on July 5th around 2:30 p.m. where a blue Volkswagen Jetta drove onto the sidewalk in the 100 block of 16th Street North, striking a pedestrian and running over a small tree, fleeing at a high rate of speed. The conditions of the pedestrian or the driver are currently unknown. Police have released surveillance images to assist in their investigation. Anyone with information about this incident or who can identify either the pedestrian or the owner and operator of the vehicle is asked to contact 403-330-4444. A 36-year-old woman from the Blood Tribe unlawfully at large was arrested in Lethbridge. Shaylee Eagle Plume Bruised Head was arrested by the Southern Alberta RCMP Crime Reduction Unit at a residence in Lethbridge after she defeated her court-ordered electronic monitoring device. She was waiting on bail, awaiting a court date to speak to a total of 32 charges coming from multiple Albertan municipalities, including Calgary, Cochrane, and Okotoks, among others. A warrant was then issued for her arrest. Eagle Plume Bruised Head is now facing 2 additional charges on failure to comply with her release order. She was remanded in custody and was scheduled to appear in court last Monday. Outside of Lethbridge, Medicine Hat police have arrested and issued 16 charges against a 34-year-old man in relation to an armed robbery at a residence in the city. In the early morning hours on Wednesday, members of the MHPS patrol section responded to a report of a robbery at a private residence in the 200 block of 8th Street Southeast. Officers quickly located and contained the suspects who had fled to a residence in the 0 block of 11th Street Southeast. A search warrant was executed, resulting in the seizure of 5 firearms, among other items. The unnamed 34-year-old man who remains in custody has been charged with 16 offenses, including robbery, break-and-enter, and multiple firearms charges. The investigation continues as it has been determined to be a targeted incident. Lethbridge Police have once again partnered with Big Brothers Big Sisters of Lethbridge and District this summer to host the Kids in Cops program. The program is a mini police academy where over 3 action-packed days, participants learn about the various aspects of police work while building positive relationships through fun recreational activities. 6 children were given the chance to be mentored with members of LPS and experience a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity behind their operations. After the break, a man who was charged and convicted for his role in the 2022 Coutts border blockade is out on bail, pending the appeal of his convictions. More details are coming up next. One of the men serving a sentence for convictions connected to the 2022 Coutts border blockade is out on bail pending his appeal. Chris Carbert is serving a 6.5-year sentence for mischief over $5,000 and possession of a weapon for a dangerous purpose. He has appealed his convictions and sentence and has maintained his innocence. Carbert was convicted alongside Anthony Olenek, who was handed the same sentence in 2024. Both men were acquitted on the more serious charge of conspiracy to murder RCMP officers. In April, the 2 men were denied parole after the parole board found they lacked accountability, but a Corrections Services Canada assessment completed for the purposes of Carbert's parole hearing found he is a low risk to reoffend and has support from 3 prison workers, an officer, the chaplain, and the shop instructor. The Alberta Serious Incident Response Team, or ASIRT, says a Calgary police officer has been charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. In May of 2023, ASIRT was directed to investigate a police shooting when earlier in the day a CPS officer shot at occupants of a van on Memorial Drive following a slow-speed pursuit. 2 of the occupants were struck and later pronounced dead. On Monday, following a 2-year investigation, Constable Greg Stothard was charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. The next day, he appeared in the Calgary Court of King's Bench and was released on conditions.
Every day, the Calgary Police Service strives to work collaboratively and in partnership with our local communities, especially the Indigenous communities. We know that incidents such as this may question the trust we have worked so hard to build. We have every confidence that our criminal justice system is equipped to handle this case with the seriousness and fairness it deserves. We are committed to listening, learning, and taking every possible step to understand what can be learned from what happened. This news today does not change the fact that we are committed to providing equitable and culturally respectful policing services and embracing Indigenous worldviews.
Premier Danielle Smith and her Alberta Next panel were in Edmonton Wednesday for the second in a series of summer town halls. The panel looks to gauge interest in ways Alberta could wrestle away power from Ottawa, like through a provincial pension plan, a provincial police force, and a new immigration permitting system. The proposals had clear support in Red Deer, but Edmonton's town hall was a little bit more mixed, with attendees saying they were opposed to these ideas.
On the Alberta pension plan, who would like to see a separate APP? Hands up. Who likes things the way they are, CPP?
All I care about my pension is that it exists when I retire. And I can stick with the CPP, which is one of the most effective things in the world, or I can gamble with you idiots.
Okay.
I would like to actually ask, why is this question even a question when we already have done this survey and there's only 10% of the Alberta population that was for the Alberta pension plan?
Different groups have gone out and done policy forums. The public sentiment has changed somewhat. Most recent polling that we did showed that more people were interested in an Alberta pension plan than not, and there's still a large number of undecided. So we're still consulting on that.
Alberta's opposition NDP says the provincial panel seeking citizen input on gripes with the federal government is not getting a representative sample of sentiment. Leader Naheed Nenshi says the panel is hearing the opposite of what he hears from Albertans and called the whole thing, quote, a sham. And speaking of the Alberta NDP, leader Naheed Nenshi is also taking his party on a summer tour of the province, launching a counter panel to the UCP's Alberta Next panel. Nenshi will host a series of town halls and public engagement events to challenge separatist sentiments in the province.
Things feel good now. We have strong momentum here. We've won 3 by-elections in a row. We have a government that is tripping over itself while it's frankly falling apart. and a premier who, in order to save her own political skin, she's scared of our momentum, she's scared about her grip over her own base, is now playing dice with the future of the country. Today, we launch Better Together. And this summer and into the fall, Alberta's New Democrats are hitting the road. We are going to be visiting communities across the province. My colleagues and I will be knocking on your doors. We will be visiting your community events. We'll be hosting town halls. And we'll be talking about what Albertans really need. We'll be at parades and festivals. We'll be meeting with Albertans in your communities face to face. It's a summer of listening. It's a summer of sharing. And more important, it's a summer of how we come together and show our pride and our dedication as true Canadians.
Nenshi claims he wants to be the pro-Canada politician in the province. Now, to talk more about the Alberta Next panel and the Alberta NDP's counter panel is Tyler Dawson, our legislative reporter. He also weighed in on new regulations being rolled out this fall to ban transgender women from competing in women's sports. Here is part of his interview with BCN's Jeanette Roche.
The UCP government has announced the Alberta Next panel, which is touring the province and discussing all these issues that, could increase Alberta's power within the federation. And Naheed Nenshi is really trying to cast himself as the pro-Canada candidate here, the pro-Canada potential premier. A lot of the criticism of the way that Premier Danielle Smith has handled the issue in the last year or so has been that she's sort of amping up separatist elements, not tamping down on separatist elements in the same way that former Premier Jason Kenney did when he was in power. People are maybe coming close to suggesting that she's a closet separatist. These are not things that I think are necessarily true, but certainly there's the perspective out there that this government is pretty cozy with really angry Albertans and perhaps some people who are straight up separatists. So you can imagine that creates a little bit of political room for the NDP to say, no, we're not those people. We don't believe in separation. We believe that Canada is stronger with Alberta in it, and Alberta is stronger as a part of Canada. And they can create a little bit of political room there. So what they are planning on doing is having this panel that will sort of tour the province at the same time as the Alberta Next panel, and just sort of hearing the grievances that Albertans have, probably a very different segment of Albertans than you can imagine are going to the UCP hosted panels, and also discussing ways that Canada and Alberta might be better together. So, I think to some extent, I think it's a savvy political move, actually. The NDP needs to find new territory. It needs to find new things to talk about in order to win more voters, to instead of just building up, its core of supporters that it has. It's going to need to reach across the aisle to some extent, to some of the old PC voters, to some of the Alberta Party voters that maybe went UCP in the last couple elections, maybe some of the soft conservative supporters in, suburban sort of areas that like some stuff the UCP is doing but don't like the other things. And they can't do that by talking about some of the stuff they traditionally really, really like to bang on about, healthcare being the perfect example. You can't, how many elections, right, has the Alberta NDP made public health care sort of a central core tenet of their pitch for re-election.
And speaking of the Alberta panel there, the first iteration was held Tuesday evening in Red Deer. Tyler, what happened there at that meeting?
Well, pretty much what you'd expect. I mean, Alberta's Red Deer, is nobody's idea of a liberal city. So it does seem like most of the few hundred supporters that came out, or speakers that came out, or interested people that came out, were sort of on the more conservative side of the spectrum. Now, the big thing I think that's lingering in all of this is Premier Danielle Smith is basically calling for the Constitution to be reopened and renegotiated. That's something that hasn't happened since, I think, 1992. Would be incredibly complicated, would possibly not go very well for anybody concerned, might not go well for Alberta. There's obviously constitutional amendments that Alberta wants, but that other provinces aren't going to want. Other provinces might want things that are inimical to Alberta's interests. So super complicated proposal, but certainly one of the more interesting ones. We've talked a lot about the pension plan over the last couple of years. We've talked a lot about the police force. It's kind of interesting to consider what constitutional negotiations might look like. But anyways, that's a roundabout way of saying that the first one was in Red Deer. There will be other ones around the province, so if people are interested in attending, they should keep their eye out. And I do think that you would see a slightly different tone in, say, Edmonton or Calgary than you might in somewhere like Red Deer, where you are sort of the catchment areas, lots of these very small conservative towns, right? So I think, for as interesting as it is to see what work is being done while this panel sort of on the road, it'll be the final report that comes out of it that will really tell us where this government is heading.
Tyler, Alberta is rolling out new regulations this fall, barring transgender women from competing in women's sports, but it won't apply to those who come from outside the province because they're bound by other provincial laws or rules of organization. So what will this actually look like?
Well, it's a great question because it's kind of unclear, isn't it? You know, if an organization hosts an event in Lethbridge and athletes come from outside of the province and they're not bound by these rules, what are those rules really doing? So this is for women's amateur sports essentially, and it does seem like it will affect competition in Alberta, but for these out of province athletes it won't really apply. So I do think there's a big question mark over what it is going to mean at the end of the day. You know, and some sporting organizations are sort of scratching their heads about it too and saying that, you know, the main outcome of this for us might just be that we don't host interprovincial or international events in Alberta because we can't guarantee the participation of everybody, or everyone will participate and people will be upset about it. So very confusing situation, but certainly it does seem like it'll affect sort of local tournaments, local amateur tournaments and things like that in Alberta itself with Alberta athletes. But I guess, you know, the rules are written and all that. I suppose we'll see more once it's actually in effect what happens then.
A 39-year-old man, Shahir Qasim, has been charged with hijacking after allegedly taking control of a plane at Victoria International Airport and flying to Vancouver. The former commercial pilot appeared to have called himself a messiah on a climate change mission a day before the alleged hijack. He warned of abrupt runaway global warming that he says will cause humans to go extinct within a few years. Police say the suspect allegedly threatened a flight instructor before seizing the aircraft, and he's also charged with constituting terrorism. Under Canada's criminal code, a charge of hijacking could mean a person is sentenced to life in prison. Some First Nations leaders walked out of a meeting being held with Prime Minister Mark Carney in Gatineau, Quebec Thursday. These were the first of 3 meetings with Indigenous groups over the major projects legislation called the One Canadian Economy Act, or Bill C-5, which was passed last month. The law allows cabinets to quickly grant federal approvals for big industrial projects like ports and pipelines that are deemed to be in the national interest by sidestepping existing laws. Chiefs has said that their rights were not respected by the government pushing through the legislation through Parliament. But Carney says the law is only a way to start the conversation.
Building Canada projects, national projects in the national interest, will build our national economy through Indigenous equity and full participation, equity participation and resource management. Projects built with Indigenous partners, with Indigenous communities. And the point is, one of the points is that the economic value of these projects will be shared with First Nations as partners who will help build the prosperity of your communities for generations to come.
The meeting with First Nations chiefs was held behind closed doors. Media were escorted out of the room and barred from hearing National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Nepinak's speech despite her wishes for media to remain. Earlier in the week, Federal Industry Minister Melanie Joly spoke from Halifax and discussed Bill C-5. She also referenced how the federal government wishes to invest in private companies.
We'll work on building a very strong economy. One economy, not 13 economies. And what we will do in that context is I hope we can build together. I also want us to talk about defense and how we can work together on having a new defense industrial policy. I'll be going to the Irving shipyard a bit later today, and I'll be talking, of course, about the national shipbuilding strategy, but also about how we can create jobs, because what I'm hearing is that companies want to have contracts rather than subsidies from the government. And obviously, this is the goal in the context of our investment.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has come out of the gates accusing the Prime Minister of blatant lies on numerous occasions during his election campaign, including what Poilievre calls a, quote, cornucopia of conflicts of interest like we have never seen before from a Canadian Prime Minister.
First of all, During the election campaign, Mr. Carney said, and I quote, "I own nothing but cash and personal real estate, and that's not going to change in public life." Well, it turns out while he said that, he knowingly owned 574 stocks and deferred profits and stock options in Brookfield and other companies. So it was patently and now provably false for him to say he owned nothing but cash and real estate. 2, my assets are now in a blind trust, so I don't know what exactly is in there. That too is false. He must have known what was in that blind trust because he was the one that filled out the paperwork for the ethics commissioner to report those holdings. So he knew exactly what was in his blind trust, and he just did not want Canadians to know before they went to the polls. Finally, he said, and I quote, "I do not have a connection with Brookfield Asset Management." Well, it turns out that he has continuing stock options and deferred share units in Brookfield Asset Management. And these options cannot be sold, or at least not easily, and we have no reason to believe they have been. So when he said that he had no connection to Brookfield, he was stating a patent falsehood.
Poilievre says the reason all Canadians should care about this is because Carney has used his political connections to profit himself, such as the public endorsement of Westinghouse, a nuclear energy company Brookfield invests in, as well as endorsing modular homes, heat pumps, and even jet fuel passengers must pay an extra fee for, all for which are financially backed by Brookfield. Poilievre says Conservatives are now calling on the PM to come before Canadians to explain these contradictions. Carney has not yet commented on the accusations. U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened more tariffs on Canada at a rate of 35% by August. Is there any chance the Carney government could get a deal? To talk about this and more is our political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist, Brian Lilly, who sat down with our very own Jeanette Rocher.
Possibly, but here's where I'm going to cut them some slack. It's Donald Trump. We don't know. He changes his mind a lot. He often doesn't know, he gets his own tariffs and the reasons for them confused because he has so many. And he was in the White House this week and he's asked about the letters that went out. Canada got one last week. Lots of other world leaders got them. And is there a chance to strike a deal? And he said, no, the letters are the deal. Now, in the letters, he talked about doing a deal, but when asked about it, he said, no, the letters are the deal. That's it. That's all. And then in the same answer said, but we could talk. So, he contradicts himself many times. Mm-hmm. I think he's open to a deal. Maybe this is just part of negotiating strategy. Maybe he talks off the cuff too much. I'm not sure. Yes. But, there are ways to get a deal. I just don't know that the Carney government is handling this in the right way. They don't have a salesperson in there. They've got an accountant. They've given Ambassador Kristen Hillman the lead on this instead of someone like his point man on this politically, Dominic LeBlanc. LeBlanc is the type of guy that you send in to seal the deal. Ambassador Hillman is someone you send in to, take an accounting of things when they're done, to take the inventory. Very accomplished woman, very smart, well-regarded, but this needs a politician's touch, a salesperson's touch. That's why I think they're handling badly.
The Prime Minister made some comments about intensifying trade talks, but he also hinted that we may not get a deal without tariffs, and that seems very likely. Although we are talking about Donald Trump again, so you never know.
So this is something that I've been writing about and talking about since February when I went down to Washington with Premier Ford and several of the other premiers. Because what we were hearing on the ground was support on both sides of the aisle for a global 10% tariff. Now, it wasn't universal support, but it was starting to grow. That maybe every country pays a minimum 10% tariff, and then you have deals on other issues on the side. In the deal that the United Kingdom struck, there is a 10% wide-ranging tariff. And so we may face a deal where, yes, some of our goods get in tariff-free, but there are still tariffs on other parts of the supply chain or our exports. So Prime Minister Carney acknowledged this. One, he said trade talks will intensify, but two, we need to understand that the whole global order has changed and we may not get a deal without it. I don't think that's going to sit well with a lot of Canadians who appear to be in a fighting mood. I'm not sure fighting's the right way to do it, but they appear to be in a fighting mood.
A new poll from Angus Reid shows most Canadians want tough talks with the United States, a real hardline position, obviously. So will we get a deal there?
Well, if you take the hardline position, then no, because that means you're demanding things but not willing to give anything. And this poll shows that no, we shouldn't give in on this. No, we shouldn't give on that. No, we shouldn't give on anything. But we want. And that's been the complaint that the Americans have about us and other countries have had about us during trade talks, that we want to protect all of our things. And Canada can be a very protectionist country, but then we say, now let us sell to you. Well, wait a minute, it's got to be give and take. And that's how any negotiation has to be. That doesn't mean capitulating to the Americans. It means negotiating in good faith. Yeah, we're going to have to give something on dairy quota that will upset Quebec's dairy farmers. We're going to have to give some things on other issues that are trade irritants between the two countries, but that's because we want something in return from them. The Angus Reid poll even said, should we buy more military equipment or promise to from the Americans to try and secure a trade deal? Absolutely not, said the majority. Well, okay, well, what are you willing to do to get a deal? If you just don't want a deal, if you just want to be angry, then so be it. But your neighbors, your kids, yourself, you could be unemployed as a result of this. Jobs are on the line. We have to take these things seriously, and we have to do them properly, not just being angry Canadians who want to be furious and condescending to the Americans.
Restaurants in Quebec can now charge up to $10 for each reservation no-show. An association representing the province's restaurant owners has estimated that no-shows cost the average eatery about $49,000 per year. But restaurants have to follow a number of rules to apply the fee, including reminding customers of an upcoming reservation and giving them an easy way to cancel. The fee can be applied only to groups of 2 or more and only if none of the members of the party show up. A Research Co. survey released earlier this year came up with some interesting findings when Canadians were asked what things are very important to them. As you might expect, family ranked very high, coming in at 76%. How do friends, career, and religion rank in importance? The answer to that is coming up next. And if you're watching us online, that full interview is available on our YouTube channel.